Please introduce yourself, your job title, and a brief description of your day-to-day.
So my name is Allan Rey, and I'm the Urban Forestry Manager at Casey Trees. A brief description of my day-to-day varies on the season. So in the fall and spring, we have our planting seasons, which are very, very busy. We're moving around from parks, schools, and homeowners in the city to plant as many trees as we can. Typically 5,000 a year at current numbers. And in the summer, we are watering, so that's going with 4 big trucks, 500 gallons, all across the city, and take care of those trees that we planted. Winter looks a little different. We do a lot of pruning, so structural pruning on small trees, up to about 20, 25 feet max.
Okay. And tell me a little something about the trees behind you.
So the trees here were planted in spring. Sorry, I will start one over. Spring. When were they planted? Say spring 20. Yeah, spring 2019. I could be wrong. So the trees here were planted spring 2019. These are young trees that require a lot of care and maintenance, but in a few years they'll be established on their own and they'll grow into large canopy trees, providing quite a few services for the city and the people that frequent this park.
So please provide some institutional information on the work and goals of Casey.
Yeah, Casey Trees at its core is to connect trees and people, and we do that by protecting the tree canopy of DC, to restore, enhance, and protect the tree canopy of DC. And our primary goal at the moment is to raise the canopy of DC up to 40% coverage by year 2032.
Okay. What's the hardest part of your job?
So it's a dynamic job that requires a lot of different hats. I would say the hardest parts are when project organizers will fall through on their end of the deal, change things last minute on us, or they all of a sudden want more trees or far fewer trees than originally planned and agreed upon, and that leaves us with little room to sort of find places for those trees. We have very ambitious numbers every season, so there isn't a lot of buffer space. So even one project organizer canceling or a thunderstorm canceling an event ripples across an entire season.
What's the most rewarding part of your job, favorite part of your job?
That's a tough question. I think the most rewarding part could be planting a tree, just pure and simple. It's very rewarding to see the fruit of your labor. I also really like our school plantings, connecting with kids, planting trees with them, and seeing that connection develop is also really rewarding.
And why is this work so important? Talk about the importance of thick canopy.
Yeah, so trees have a number of functions for us in a macro and a micro scale. Obviously they sequester carbon, and that's good for the environment on a global scale. But they also reduce pollutants, and that's good on a local level. They lower people's heating bill, so that only saves them in the pocketbook, but it also helps combat climate change on the other end of less fossil fuels being burned to cool our houses. We also have a huge problem with stormwater runoff in DC. We have a joint system, so there is more impermeable surface now than ever in DC, and that means that a lot of water is running into the Anacostia, filling our sewers and putting sewage in the Anacostia. So one large tree can capture thousands of gallons of rainwater a year, and if you expand that by 5,000 trees a year, all of a sudden you're talking some pretty big numbers.
And so can you expand on the combating climate change aspect of what thick canopy and what these trees are going to be able to do?
Yeah, I mean, each tree will sequester, depending on the species of tree, for hundreds of years. It is important to note that there is an input every time you plant a tree, every time you take an action. Just because of the way our transportation system works, we are creating a carbon input at first, moving the tree, planting the tree. That all requires some level of input. So our goal is to reduce those inputs, so as soon as possible that tree can be a net positive. But yeah, if you think about, we plant 5,000 trees a year in the city. If you put those all in one space and looked at it, that's a small forest. So a small forest every year does quite a bit combating climate change. You know, it's, on a global scale, it's a drop in the bucket, but cities all around the world are doing this, so it does add up.
So you said that some of the hardest parts are the day-to-day logistics. Do you miss the cubicle life or what? Or the office life?
You miss the office life when it's pouring rain and you're rolling muddy trees around. You don't miss the office life when it's perfect 72 degrees out and everything's going right. So it's always a trade-off, but my role involves enough flexibility where I can spend time in the office and in the field, mostly at my discretion. So I'm lucky, blessed in that sense.
What are some of the biggest misconceptions that the general public has about the importance of trees and the work you guys do?
I think trees, it's pretty easy to sell people on trees. They speak for themselves. They have a lot of numerical value that I just listed, but there's also an intrinsic value that people recognize and appreciate just going through walks in parks. But I do think that people can forget about trees and that they require a lot of maintenance throughout the course of their life. They take care of us, but we also need to take care of them. And so we're always looking for advocates and people to volunteer. It doesn't have to be your whole life. You don't have to dedicate every weekend to it, but if everyone did it once, it would go a long way.
And are you in this line of work to stay?
Hard to say. I mean, I very much enjoy it, but I've also changed careers a couple times, so I have no plans to leave it, but I also keep my options open.
Cool. Well, I think we've